The month of March has come to a close, so it's time for me to rank all 9 March movies that I saw, plus 3 additions that I saw this year. Hi, my name is Nathan, and I talk about a bunch of movies on this channel. If you're new here, down below in the comment section, share your ranking of all the March movies that you saw. Over on my channel, I have more content like this. Check those out once this video is over. And if you enjoyed this video, click the like button and be sure to subscribe because it really does help a lot. And with that said, let's just get straight into the ranking. Easily in last place, Megamind vs. the Dune Syndicate. The original Megamind from 2010 is a classic animated DreamWorks movie where it's a send-up of the superhero genre while also just being a great superhero story about a misunderstood character. Megamind 2, it's a movie that's actually kind of offensive to me to call this an honest sequel to the original Megamind. I simply do not believe the creators of this movie created that movie of 2010. In fact, it was written by the same people, but I'm not even sure that the people who made this movie have even seen the original.
Okay, that's enough of that. Hello, loyal viewers.
It's pretty much an abomination on every single front. Everything about this movie is cheap. None of the voice cast from the original returned for this one. This one wasn't even worthy of being released in the theater. It's a straight to Peacock release. None of the characters feel like natural continuations of the way they were in the first film. And you just get stupid lines of dialogue where Megamind doesn't even know how to plug in a toaster. The story is horrible where everything that it does with the story contradicts what they did with the first film. Like, so the original Megamind accepts Minion as his friend, and this one he's just like kind of overlooks it again, and they just like redo his arc. There's the villains are this new supervillain team that he was apparently the leader of that was never mentioned. They do this whole like end credits thing that contradicts everything that was in the opening of the original Megamind. It's just offensive. Kind of offensive if you're a big fan of the original Megamind like I am. And nothing to me is as bad as the animation. For a sequel to Megamind that is released on Peacock, this movie has some of the cheapest animation I have seen. For some reason, this movie that came out in 2024 looks substantially worse than the movie that came out literally 14 years ago. From there, you just get a bunch of stupid scenes, stupid dialogue. Everything about this movie is unbelievably stupid. It is so bad, it made me rethink about the first film. Like, it makes this film and the first film a bit worse for how bad this movie is. Honestly, I could probably go rambling on about how bad this movie is for quite a while. I could probably do that for a long time. But just this film, it's just horrible on every single level. And I'm a pretty generous person. I think I had more positive things to say about Madam Web than most other people did. But this movie, I can't even think of a single positive thing. I don't even think it's possible for any human being to go through this movie without wanting to like shut it off. Within 5 minutes of it, I was ready to throw in the towel. I managed to survive through the whole thing somehow. But this is definitely not a movie worth watching. And I owe Madam Web an apology because if you thought Madam Web was bad, wait till you get to Megamind 2. It is horrible.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Next up is Spaceman. If you don't know what this is Adam Sandler's new dramatic film. So lately over the past few years, he's been doing these dramatic films. He did Hustle. Back in 2022, he did Uncut Gems. And this is his new dramatic project that dropped on Netflix. Essentially, it follows a spaceman who is troubled by his past, and a big, gigantic, anthropomorphic spider basically becomes his therapist or something. And this is his new dramatic project. Now, compared to Megamind 2, this one seems like a masterpiece and revolutionary in filmmaking compared to that garbage, but the film itself is pretty forgettable. And that's simply because it's just inherently a very slow-paced film. You're watching kind of the day-to-day life of this spaceman, and he's talking to a giant anthropomorphic spider, which is kind of ridiculous, yet it takes itself very seriously as it's trying to be a dramatic film. And so inherently it's just very slow-paced, not really much happens. You're watching him as he reflects on the mistakes of his past, the particular plot that they went with, and the character, our lead character, I didn't really find invested into his backstory. Now, there are some pretty good performances here, Adam Sandler being in the lead, and Carey Mulligan, straight off of Maestro, straight off of being nominated for an Oscar. She's good in this movie, although she doesn't really appear much. She's more like a minor character in this film. But for me, overall, it's just a lot of talking. Unusually serious talking between a man and a spider. And for the most part, it's just really boring. And it's not really my type of film. But if you're into Adam Sandler doing dramatic, then cool. I like Adam Sandler doing dramatic as well. But this one was just really boring for the most part. Kicking off the top 10, Drive Away Dolls. So this is not one that came out in March. As I said at the beginning of this video, I think three of these movies did not come out in March. They came out in previous months. I just happened to watch them in March, and I decided to talk about them here. If you don't know what Drive Away Dolls is, it's the latest film from Ethan Coen. It does not have his brother involved. It's not from both of them. It's from one of them. And the Coen brothers can direct some really good stuff. They directed Best Picture winner No Country for Old Men. Like, Best Picture winner. And so, I haven't seen any Coen brothers films, so I was curious if one of them could do something. And this one's basically a road trip comedy with these two people who accidentally steal a car with a head and some certain objects that I will not say out loud in this video. It's just a super goofy story with some really weird dialogue all throughout, and it has a comedy. And so the film, as a comedy, it's supposed to make me laugh, and I got a few chuckles here and there, but it didn't really make me laugh hard enough. It's kind of like it was trying a bit too hard, or it was just like saying something sexual out there. It was just like saying something and then they expect you to get a laugh out of it. But it can be funny at times, but it's just, this is a story that I simply just can't really get into. With certain objects that are involved in this movie, I just couldn't really buy or get into the plot or take it seriously in any kind of way. And I know it's a comedy, but it's not particularly a movie that I enjoyed. Also, there's just some weird visuals and the way it transitions in between scenes. And I don't know what Ethan Coen was going for here. Like, was he trying to make the audience feel high? Was he trying to just have a visual flair? And so, as an overall watch, it's not very enjoyable to me. And, like, even our lead characters aren't really that enjoyable or likable. And so, it's a movie that, like, I feel like it's super niche for a certain group of audience, but I am definitely at that audience, and so I didn't really care for this one all that much. Number 9, Ricky Stanicky. If you don't know what this one is, this is a straight-to-Amazon comedy directed by one of the Farrelly brothers. So if you don't know who the Farrelly brothers are, they directed my favorite comedy of all time, Dumb and Dumber. So naturally, when it was said that a new comedy would be releasing on Amazon by one of them, I was naturally intrigued, throwing Zac Efron, John Cena in there, and you had my interest. Checked it out, and it ends up kind of just being another one of these direct-to-streaming, very forgettable comedies. And I got a couple chuckles here and there. There are a couple gags that I think worked, a couple running jokes there, and it's never a boring film, but it's just not really all that memorable. I watched it for the first time like a couple weeks back, and it just isn't all that memorable. And I think Zac Efron, he's fine in this movie, but especially after coming off Iron Claw, I wish he would do more of that dramatic acting he did in Iron Claw, because he was just great in Iron Claw, and now he's just in this lowbrow, low humor comedy where every sentence has to have a sexual reference. And the movie, what I just found a little bit weird about it is that it also kind of tries to be a dramatic and character-based film, while also having all the crass, inappropriate humor that has all throughout it. And so, overall, just a film that it's just not very memorable. Number 8 is Damsel, and I went into this movie knowing almost nothing about it. I had not seen a trailer. I did not know the central premise. All I knew going into this was it's a straight-to-Netflix fantasy release with Millie Bobby Brown in the lead. That's all I knew going into it. And sometimes I like going into movies blindly like that because sometimes it could be this fresh, new experience. And I think this movie actually had the potential to be a fun revenge fantasy story. So, the basic premise of this film is a girl is forced to get married into this family, and they take this blood oath, and she has to be fed to a dragon because the dragon has a history with this family. And the dragon would hunt anybody of blood by the family. So that's a pretty interesting premise, and you would think it would set up for an interesting revenge story with Millie Bobby Brown's character, but that's not really the direction they went with this film. And it's just a film where not much happens in the story. So you get her getting married to this family and going, trying to survive the dragon, trying to escape the cave. So we spend all this time, literally, with her wandering around the cave and finding an escape route, only for it not to work. And so she has to, and that's a majority of the film. So I just watched her just wander around the cave for nothing. Like, if that escape route was, like, useless. And it tries to have a movie that makes it feel epic, but due to the way the story actually plays out, the way she actually escapes, the way she gets the revenge, it feels kind of anticlimactic and small when you're actually watching the film. Still, I think Millie Bobby Brown is good in the lead. It's fun enough if you like this fantasy type of genre, but as somebody that's not into fantasy all that much, I think I needed to have the right expectations. I think I needed to have seen a trailer, known the premise of it, to go into this movie. But I thought I could just imagine the better version, a better story of this film going into it. So overall, this is the one that it had the potential to be much higher up on this list, but unfortunately, it's just the fantasy movie that kind of wasted its potential and not much happened in the story. Number 7, Roadhouse. And this is a remake of an 80s film with Patrick Swayze. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I'm not a big fan of that 80s film.
Ask him to walk, but be nice. If he won't walk, walk him, but be nice.
I put a poll up on my community tab. A lot of you guys seem to like the 80s film better than this one. As for me, I actually enjoy this one more than the 80s film, simply because I'm not really a big fan of the 80s film. It's heavily elevated by the charisma of the cast, Jake Gyllenhaal being in the lead. There's some nicely done action, the camera's always moving, it's sometimes in close-up. The plot is fairly straightforward, although there's not really much of a plot. I think this film kind of has the same problems as the original. The original, so we just didn't have much plot, it was just a series of bar hijinks and a little bit of a revenge story. This one has the same type of thing, it's just sometimes on boats. But I think the boat setting does give it it's a little bit more interesting than what they do in the original. I found it more entertaining than the original. I found our lead character with Jake Gyllenhaal to have a little bit more depth than Patrick Swayze in the original. I don't particularly feel like this is a memorable film. I didn't even think the 80s version was a memorable film. It kind of feels like an afterthought after you watch it, just like, okay, it's another one of these, and Doug Liman, director of Boy Night on the Edge of Tomorrow, directed this, and I don't think his particular style shows in this movie, and it's more enjoyable both of these Roadhouse movies are more enjoyable as just a series of bar hijinks, like I said. It's very thin on plot, but if you're into this type of thing, then I suppose you would really enjoy both Roadhouse movies. But as somebody who prefers like plot-based stories, this one was entertaining, but it just didn't work overall for me. But it's one that I maybe could find myself rewatching. Number 6 is Kung Fu Panda 4. And so, I am a long-time big fan of the Kung Fu Panda franchise. The first 3 films, they have this ridiculous premise about animals doing martial arts, but they all have this heart to them that I thought just elevated all 3 of them. This film can be really funny at times. Po is just as charming as ever. He has a nice dynamic with Zen, our Aquafina character. There's a fun dynamic between the two. But, as a whole, this movie, as entertaining and watchable as it is, I didn't find nearly as good as the first 3 films. And that's coming from a longtime fan of the Kung Fu Panda franchise. And so, I think they sabotaged themselves in the foot. They shot themselves in the foot a little bit, because they removed the Furious 5, and so you remove that group dynamic, and essentially replace it with Zen, the Aquafina character, and I didn't think, while their dynamic was fun, I didn't particularly think it was nearly as good as his dynamic with the Furious 5. And I don't think it had a good enough story to justify it being told. The third film kind of ended on this high, satisfying note, and this film kind of just feels like this tacked-on thing at the end. But for me, what really hurt this film is that it lacked the emotion that made the first 3 so good. And here, you're just getting more Kung Fu Panda, more fun Kung Fu hijinks, but it's missing that emotion to it. It's missing that heart. And Po does have a character arc, but it's not nearly as good as the stuff in the first 3 films. The Chameleon is a much less compelling villain, whereas our first 3 villains had a personal motivation, while she just wants power. And by the end of it, Po is retiring from the Dragon Warrior and giving the mantle to Zen. I think I could have, much like Roadhouse, I could have imagined a better version of the ending. And I'll give you my pitch. Po gives the Dragon Warrior mantle to Tai Lung after Tai Lung acknowledges him as a great Dragon Warrior. And that closes out, that I might have liked this one a lot more, because that would close out Po's arc pretty well as Tai Lung's arc really well. I think that would have worked very well, but why would Po give the Dragon Warrior mantle to Zen? And so, for me, this is one where it's entertaining, it's watchable, I could rewatch it, but if I'm in the mood for Kung Fu Panda, I'm probably just going to watch one of the other 3. Kicking off the top 5, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. And from here on out, I would say these top 5 I would give positive reviews. This has not been that great of a year for movies, to be honest, because I saw 12 new releases this March, and 7 of them I wouldn't go positive on. But these 5 I would. And so when it comes to Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, what I really enjoyed about this one is that it fully embraces what made the MonsterVerse work, which was Godzilla vs. Kong is the best film to me in that franchise, and this film, it just expands upon that and delivers more of that. So it has more jokes, more CGI destruction, more monsters, more monster fights, more mythology. It includes all of it. It just goes for it. And when I say it builds on the mythology, it adds to this new Indian tribe. It adds, monsters like Mothra into the mix. It just kind of really goes for it. And I think some of the mythology is built around the fact that it's set in Hollow Earth, which is a more interesting setting to be in. And the film, most of it is set in Hollow Earth, so it just has opportunities for these new creatures to arrive, new monsters, all leading up to this big, gigantic showdown with a bunch of apes, monkeys, Godzilla, Kong, Mothra, kind of just all of it is right there. And that's what I really enjoyed about it. It has all the ridiculousness that you want. Literally, one of the first things that happens in this movie is that Kong gets a dentist appointment from humans. Like, it kind of just goes for all the ridiculousness. Now, it's not going to be for everybody. Like the previous films in the franchise, it's very thin on plot, very thin on characters. On an entertainment level, it relies on the CGI spectacle and all the stuff that you want. It's very Kong-centric, and Kong and this little Kong here, and there's a dynamic between the two of them. It's kind of ridiculous, and so you have to go in wanting schlocky fun to enjoy this movie. But I went in expecting schlocky fun, and so I enjoyed what I got out of this movie. By no means is it going to end up in my top 10 of the year or anything, but I did have fun with it. It was entertaining. Number 4, I.S.S. This is one that actually was on my radar when it first came out. I did want to see it, but timing just didn't work out, so I wasn't able to see it. Finally saw it for the first time a couple days ago, and for me, this was just a really nice thriller with a solid concept. Where, basically, if you don't know what this is, it is a thriller set on the I.S.S. with Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts. And while they are on the ship, a nuclear war breaks out between a second Cold War, but a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia, and which is a very solid concept, and they are given orders to take control of the I.S.S.
And we were told to take the I.S.S. by any means necessary.
Now, it does take a little bit to get going. It's just like them hanging out for the first 30 or so minutes. But once it gets going for me, it really does get going. It's a very... for me, it was an effective paranoia where you don't know who to trust. You don't know who's lying, who's not. You don't know everybody's intentions. And it lingers on that paranoia throughout the entire film. And I just thought that really worked about it. And because you don't know who to trust and you don't know the intentions, it can have you expect one thing and it goes something and does something completely different. There's some nice reveals thrown in there. But like, I didn't really like how the movie ended in the way that, well, like, what actually happens, or it tries to do this like ambiguous ending. I don't particularly like those types of endings for thrillers, because for me it's not very satisfying. But for me, it's just a really effective paranoia thriller. And then I checked the Rotten Tomatoes score. It's like a 60% from critics and a 40% from audiences. But that just wasn't my experience with the film. I thought it was a very solid thriller. It could have been better. There's some room for improvement, but I thought it was solid. Kicking off the top 3 is Ordinary Angels. Of all the movies on this list, this is the one that I watched the last. I watched it for the first time literally earlier today. And for me, it's just an old-fashioned feel-good movie. Inherently, it is a heartbreaking and uplifting story. So if you don't know what this is a movie that came out back in February, and never heard of it until I saw the trailer in the theater one time when I was watching a movie. I think it was like Lisa Frankenstein when I went to the theater, that the trailer played for this film. And it's just this heartbreaking story. It's based on a true story about this family who the mom in the family dies, and the child, one of the daughters, has to have a liver transplant and is gaining a disease. And this lady, played by Hilary Swank, is trying to do the best she can to help him. And it's sometimes heartbreaking with some of the sequences, but by the end of it, it's also very, very uplifting by the time you get to the end credits. And we don't get a lot of movies like that, where it's just old-fashioned, uplifting stories, and they show the best of humanity. Where, especially through Hilary Swank's character, she's doing everything she can. She's willing to sacrifice everything for this little girl she's only met and only known for a month or so. And it just shows the best of humanity. And it's just old-fashioned, it's just feel-good. Not really one I will gravitate to rewatch. It is a very emotional, very heavy film. And so therefore, I'm not gonna just go and rewatch this film. But if you get all your friends together, get your family together, watch something like this. It's very uplifting, very sad at times, very powerful and emotional. I just thought it was very well done. Our runner-up is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire going into 2024. This was one of my most anticipated films of the year, and a large part of that is because Ghostbusters Afterlife, the previous film in the franchise, ended up as my favorite movie of 2021. And so naturally, really excited going into this movie, went out to go see it, and I really, really dug this film. Right off the bat, it just did something newer with the Ghostbusters franchise. It's not about starting the business. It's not about Gozer or Zool or Vince Clortho. It's not about that. It's actually doing something new and telling a different story with a different threat. I didn't find this threat quite as interesting as Gozer and Zool, ironically, but I appreciated that they were trying to do something new with the franchise, and for the most part, it worked for me. There's a larger set of characters. You get our cast of Afterlife, as well as our original Ghostbusters, as well as Walter Peck and some other side characters from the first Ghostbusters film. And all of them are just very charming, and they reminded me that I love being around these characters. And it still maintains all the charm of the franchise, even when it has a stacked ensemble cast. And like a Ghostbusters movie, it's very funny at times, with all the sarcasm. The characters are just as charming as ever. With Afterlife, comparing it to Afterlife, I will say it doesn't have as nearly as effective of a heart that Afterlife had. It doesn't have that heart to it. And our lead character, Phoebe, she does go on a character arc. They do have a journey for her to go on, but I didn't find it nearly as effective as Afterlife. And like I said previously, the plot is not as interesting. But as a big fan of the Ghostbusters franchise, as somebody who puts Ghostbusters in my top 3 favorite movies of all time, I really enjoyed the new aspects of what this movie had to offer to the franchise. And so, really dug this one. But of course, coming in first place is Dune Part 2. Now, this is another one going into 2024, was one of my most anticipated films of the year. And with the original Dune, it took me a while to appreciate, because I was only 11 when it came out. My channel did exist when it came out, but I couldn't fully appreciate it. When I rewatched it, I appreciated it a lot more, and I was much more excited for this movie. And this movie takes everything that was awesome about the first film, and it expands upon that. The visuals, the scope and scale are just immaculate from beginning to end. And the performances are just often powerful from these characters, and the way they deliver their lines. And it's just better on every single level. And it's better than the first film, which is already an amazing film. The story, to me, what I appreciated about this one is it's much more straightforward than the first film. The first film did such a good job at building up the setup, establishing the characters, the houses, the goals of the characters. This one just goes into full motion, where the story just kicks in from the very opening, and by the end of it, you still want more of the story. You absolutely do care about the characters. You absolutely care about the story. It is a spectacle on the big screen, and it has an ending while leaving you wanting more. It doesn't particularly complete the story. It's a lot more satisfying. And that, just like with the first film ending on a cliffhanger, this one's a lot more satisfying. This one kind of ends on a cliffhanger, but I found it to close out some plot points very, very well. Everything is just on an epic scale when it comes to this film. Now, I will say it is a bit too long for my liking. It is 2 hours and 45 minutes. But this movie is just an amazing piece of art that was released in March. this is a great piece of sci-fi that was released. And so for me, I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me, this is the best film of March. Well, there you have it. That's my ranking of the March new releases that I saw. Down below in the comment section, share your ranking of the new March releases over on my channel. I have more content like this. Check those out once this video is over, which is right now. Click the like button and be sure to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one.